have this weird habit of falling down internet rabbit holes at the worst possible times, usually right when I should be sleeping. A few nights ago, I was searching for something completely unrelated. Honestly, I don't even remember what. And somehow I ended up reading about a town where you're legally required to yield to a bird. Not just any bird, a peacock, strutting across the road like it owns the place. Because apparently, in the eyes of the law, it kind of does. I sat there staring at my screen thinking, wait, that has to be fake. So I started checking. And checking led to more checking. And before I knew it, I had a whole running list of towns across California with laws so strange they sound made up. Except they're not. Or at least they were real enough at some point that someone bothered to write them down. Some of these still technically exist. Others might just be legend now, repeated so many times nobody remembers where they actually came from. Either way, I couldn't stop reading, and I figured you'd probably enjoy this rabbit hole just as much as I did. So let's get into 10 California towns with the strangest local laws you'll ever hear about. Before we jump in, if you're someone who gets a little too invested in random trivia like this, you're exactly who this channel is made for. So go ahead and hit subscribe now. There's a lot more where this is coming from, and you don't want to miss what's further down this list. Number 10. San Francisco. San Francisco County. Let's start in one of the most recognizable cities in the entire country. Because even a place as famous and photographed as San Francisco has some legal history that barely anyone talks about. Somewhere in the city's past, lawmakers apparently felt the need to address a very specific scenario: an elephant walking down Market Street. According to the old rule, if that ever happens, the elephant needs to be on a leash. It sounds completely absurd today, but it actually makes a lot more sense once you remember that traveling circuses and shows used to pass through cities like this one regularly, parading animals right through the middle of downtown as a form of promotion. At some point, that must have caused enough concern, or maybe even an actual incident, for the city to decide it needed some kind of rule in place. But the strange laws don't stop there. There's also an old ordinance about carrying bread, cakes, or pastries in open baskets without any kind of covering, a rule that traces back to a time when food safety and hygiene standards looked completely different from what we're used to today. Baked goods sitting exposed to dust, insects, and whatever else might be floating around the street apparently became enough of a concern that someone wrote actual legislation about it. What I find so interesting about laws like these is how much they reveal about a city's past without needing a history book to explain it. San Francisco spends so much of its modern identity wrapped up in innovation, tech culture, and forward-thinking energy that finding these strange little relics buried in its legal code feels like uncovering a secret nobody bothered to mention. It's proof that even the most iconic, most talked-about cities in the country still have quirky, half-forgotten corners of history sitting quietly in the background, waiting for someone curious enough to go digging around and find them. Number 9. Berkeley, Alameda County. Berkeley carries this reputation as a place built around big ideas, deep thinkers, and progressive movements that have shaped entire generations of thought. So naturally, you'd expect its most famous strange law to be something equally serious or intellectual. Instead, what you actually get is a rule about whistling for a lost canary before 7 in the morning, which is apparently illegal within city limits. Just take a second to really sit with how specific that is. Not whistling in general, not even whistling for pets broadly. Specifically whistling to call back a missing canary, and specifically before 7 a.m. There's something almost poetic about how oddly precise a law like this ends up being. You can practically imagine the scene that led to it: some poor soul waking up their entire neighborhood way too early, desperately whistling non-stop trying to lure their runaway bird back home, until a frustrated neighbor finally complained loudly enough that the city decided to step in and do something about it. And somehow, that one complaint apparently turned into an actual piece of legislation that technically still exists today, decades later. What makes a law like this so entertaining is just how much personality it carries. It's not some broad, generic noise ordinance covering all kinds of disruptive behavior. It's this incredibly specific little scenario that clearly happened at least once, real enough for someone to sit down and formally write it into the books. Berkeley being home to something this randomly precise feels like the perfect contrast to its serious, thoughtful public reputation. It's a fun reminder that even the most intellectual, forward-thinking communities still have plenty of room for a little bit of everyday absurdity buried somewhere in their history, quietly waiting there for someone curious enough to stumble across it one random night online. Number 8. Pacific Grove, Monterey County. Pacific Grove is this stunning little coastal town known for its dramatic ocean views and its surprisingly deep connection to nature. And it turns out that connection runs so deep that the town actually passed an entire law dedicated to protecting one of its smallest, most delicate visitors. It is, quite literally, illegal to molest butterflies anywhere within town limits. Now, before your mind jumps somewhere dramatic, this law is really about the monarch butterflies that migrate to Pacific Grove in massive numbers every single year, transforming certain parts of the town into this incredible, fluttering spectacle during specific seasons. The town has actually earned the nickname Butterfly Town, USA, because of just how meaningful this yearly migration is to local identity. And once you understand that background, the law starts to feel a lot less random and a lot more intentional. Local businesses, seasonal festivals, and even public artwork throughout town celebrate these butterflies, and there's a genuine, deeply rooted sense of community pride tied to protecting them from any kind of harm. It's honestly kind of touching once you think it through, an entire town coming together to legally safeguard something as fragile and temporary as a butterfly's brief seasonal visit each year. What makes Pacific Grove stand out on a list like this is that unlike a lot of these other strange laws that feel completely random or hopelessly outdated, this particular one still carries real, tangible meaning today. It represents a genuine, ongoing commitment to protecting the natural environment that shapes this town's entire identity, wrapped up in a law that sounds a little absurd out of context, but actually reflects something the community has cared deeply about for generations. It's proof that not every strange law is just some forgotten joke from the past. Sometimes it's a small, quirky window into exactly what a place truly values. Number 7. San Jose, Santa Clara County. San Jose sits right at the heart of Silicon Valley, globally known for tech companies, groundbreaking innovation, and massive corporate campuses that dominate the landscape. But buried somewhere in its municipal code is a law that has absolutely nothing to do with technology and everything to do with household pets. Residents here are apparently limited in exactly how many animals they're allowed to own at any given time. There's a cap on cats, a separate cap on dogs, another one for rabbits, and a limited allowance for other animals beyond that, though fish, for whatever reason, seem to get a complete pass. It's such an oddly specific and old-fashioned sounding rule for a city so closely associated with cutting-edge industry and modern innovation. You'd think a place known worldwide for pushing technological boundaries wouldn't have laws quite this small town in nature, and yet here we are. The reasoning behind rules like this usually comes down to legitimate concerns about overcrowding, ongoing noise complaints, or even animal welfare situations tied to hoarding that probably happened at some specific point in the city's history. Still, picturing someone actually getting an official visit or citation because they own one rabbit too many feels like something ripped straight out of a comedy sketch, rather than something that could actually happen in real life. What makes this particular law so genuinely interesting is the contrast it creates against the city's carefully cultivated modern image. San Jose spends enormous energy branding itself as this forward-thinking hub of global innovation, yet buried deep in its own rulebook is this almost quaint, old-fashioned restriction that feels completely disconnected from the sleek, tech-forward identity the city projects to the rest of the world. It's a good reminder that no matter how much a place grows, expands, or reinvents itself over the decades, some of those older, quirkier laws just never quite get cleaned out of the system, sitting there quietly in the background for years, waiting patiently to surprise anyone curious enough to actually go looking. Quick pause right here, because if you're someone who genuinely enjoys collecting random trivia like this, the kind of thing you end up bringing up completely out of nowhere in conversation, subscribing really does help this channel keep making more of exactly this kind of content. And honestly, the towns coming up next on this list might be even more entertaining than what we've already covered. Number 6. Long Beach, Los Angeles County. Long Beach has built itself a reputation as this relaxed, easygoing coastal city, full of beaches, boardwalks, and that unmistakable Southern California charm that draws people in from all over. But somewhere along the way, local officials apparently decided garages needed some pretty strict boundaries. According to city rules, garages here are meant strictly for parking cars, and technically speaking, storing anything else in there. Trucks, trailers, spare furniture, whatever random stuff tends to pile up over the years can actually put a homeowner on the wrong side of local code. If you've ever seen how most people genuinely use their garages in real life, this law probably sounds a little unrealistic. Because honestly, half the garages across the country have basically turned into makeshift storage units rather than actual places where anyone parks a vehicle. But apparently, Long Beach wanted things kept simple, clean, and functional, at least according to whatever was written down on paper decades ago. And that's not even the only oddly specific rule this city happens to have on record. There's also an old law limiting exactly when residents are allowed to enjoy a casual round of miniature golf, cutting things off firmly at 1 in the morning. Because apparently, at some point in this city's history, late-night mini-golf sessions genuinely became enough of a problem that lawmakers felt the need to step in and put an official curfew on it. It's honestly kind of amusing, imagining a situation where nighttime putt-putt got rowdy enough to require actual government intervention. Together, these two rules paint this pretty specific picture of a city that, at some particular moment, really valued order, tidiness, and quiet evenings, even if that meant regulating something as harmless-sounding as a casual, friendly game of miniature golf among friends. Number 5. Blythe, Riverside County. Now here's one that genuinely made me laugh out loud the very first time I came across it. In Blythe, a small desert town sitting near the Arizona border, there's apparently a rule about exactly who is and isn't allowed to wear cowboy boots within town limits. Specifically, you're only permitted to wear them if you actually own at least 2 cows. I genuinely have no idea who came up with this exact requirement or what specific situation led to it being written down in the first place, but it's easily one of the most randomly specific, oddly enforced-sounding laws on this entire list. Just picture the scene for a second. Someone confidently walking down the street in a brand new pair of boots, only to somehow get stopped because they can't produce proof of actual cattle ownership on demand. It genuinely sounds like something pulled straight out of an old Western comedy sketch rather than an actual functioning piece of legislation. Yet here it is, living on as part of Blythe's ongoing local legend. Whether this particular law is still technically enforceable today, or has simply become one of those stories that keeps getting passed around purely because it's too entertaining to ever let go of, it perfectly captures the overall personality of small desert towns scattered throughout this particular part of California. These are places where ranching culture, old cowboy history, and small-town pride all blend together seamlessly into local identity. And every once in a while, that identity ends up baked directly into the legal code in the strangest, most unexpected possible ways. Blythe doesn't usually get much attention on most people's mental map of California, tucked quietly away near the state border. But this one single law has probably done more to put the town on people's radar than almost anything else about it combined. It's honestly a great example of how the smallest, most overlooked towns sometimes end up carrying the biggest, most unforgettable little stories. Number 4. Fresno, Fresno County. Fresno sits right in the heart of California's Central Valley, mostly known for its deep agricultural roots and for being a major stopping point somewhere between the Bay Area and Southern California. But dig into its local laws for even a few minutes, and you'll find a genuinely entertaining lineup of rules that all feel like they came from 3 completely different decades entirely. First up, lizards hanging out in city parks are apparently legally protected from being disturbed or bothered, which honestly sounds sweet, if a little oddly specific for an actual law. Then there's a rule specifically against playing bingo while intoxicated, which raises so many genuine questions about what exactly happened to make that particular combination concerning enough to require its own dedicated legislation. And finally, permanent markers are actually restricted from being sold within certain parts of the city, a rule pretty clearly aimed at cutting down on ongoing graffiti problems around town. Put all 3 of these together, and you end up with this strange little snapshot of Fresno's shifting priorities over the years. protecting local wildlife, keeping bingo nights respectable, and trying to keep the city's walls free of unwanted graffiti. It's such a random, mismatched combination that it almost feels like three completely different city councils, decades apart from each other, each quietly contributed their own strange little addition to the overall rulebook. What I find genuinely entertaining about Fresno's laws specifically is how each one seems to tell its own tiny little story all on its own. You can practically picture the exact situations that probably led to each one. Some overly aggressive tourist harassing park lizards, a chaotic bingo night that spiraled out of control, city walls covered in graffiti finally pushing officials to crack down on marker sales. None of these laws relate to each other in any obvious way. Yet together, they paint this weirdly charming, oddly specific picture of a city that's clearly dealt with all kinds of unexpected situations over the many decades of its history. Number 3. Chico, Butte County. Chico might genuinely have one of the most impressively random collections of strange laws found anywhere on this entire list. And honestly, narrowing it down to just a couple of favorites turned out to be surprisingly difficult. For starters, bowling on the sidewalk is completely illegal here, which honestly makes a decent amount of sense from a basic safety standpoint. But it also makes you wonder just how often that was actually happening in the first place for someone to bother writing an entire dedicated law about it. Then there's the detonating a nuclear device rule, which sounds genuinely terrifying right up until you realize the actual penalty attached to it is just a flat $500 fine, which feels wildly, almost comically insufficient for something as catastrophic as an actual nuclear explosion. It's honestly one of those laws that makes you laugh specifically because of how mismatched the punishment feels compared to the sheer scale of the crime itself. And as if that wasn't already enough, apparently you also need to obtain an actual city permit if you're planning to throw hay into a cesspool. A scenario so oddly specific and strange that it's genuinely hard to even imagine the exact situation that led someone to formally legislate it in the first place. Chico's laws feel a lot less like isolated random rules scattered here and there, and a lot more like an entire personality built around a town that's clearly dealt with an unusually wide variety of chaotic situations over the years. From sidewalk bowling incidents to hay-related cesspool mishaps somewhere along the line, there's clearly a colorful, slightly chaotic history buried somewhere in this city's past that most people driving through today have absolutely no idea even exists. It's exactly this kind of unexpected depth that makes exploring local laws so genuinely fun to dig into. You start out expecting a quick laugh, and instead you end up stumbling into what feels like an entire hidden story about a town's quirky, colorful history. If you're enjoying this list even half as much as I enjoyed putting it together, go ahead and subscribe now, because we're moving into the final two towns. And honestly, these next two might just be the most well-known strange laws in the entire state. Number 2. Carmel-by-the-Sea, Monterey County. Carmel-by-the-Sea is this absolutely gorgeous little coastal town, widely known for its cottage-style architecture, charming art galleries, and that classic, postcard-perfect atmosphere that draws visitors in from all over the world. But it's also home to what might be one of the single most talked about strange laws in all of California, and it has everything to do with high heels. Apparently, wearing heels taller than 2 inches, or with a base smaller than 1 square inch, is technically illegal here unless you've gone through the process of obtaining a specific city permit beforehand. Now, before you start picturing city officials just randomly cracking down on fashion choices for no reason, there's actually a genuinely practical explanation behind this particular rule. Carmel's streets are famously uneven, lined with natural terrain and cobblestones that were never really smoothed out for modern foot traffic, which means high heels genuinely create a real trip and fall hazard for anyone walking around town. The law was apparently put into place specifically to help protect the city from potential lawsuits tied to exactly those kinds of accidents happening on its streets. And the strange laws here don't stop with footwear either. There's also an old rule requiring men's jackets and pants to actually match before they're allowed to step outside, which honestly sounds more like a casual fashion suggestion than any kind of seriously enforceable law, but apparently made its way into the official books regardless. What makes Carmel's laws so entertaining is really the sharp contrast between how elegant and polished the entire town looks on the surface, and how oddly specific its actual rules about personal appearance turn out to be underneath. You'd probably expect a place this visually refined to have laws focused on preserving historic buildings or protecting local wildlife, not carefully regulating exactly how tall someone's shoes are allowed to be while walking around. It's this perfect little contradiction that makes Carmel's legal history so genuinely fun to dig into. A beautiful, artsy coastal town that apparently takes both its sidewalk safety and its fashion coordination remarkably seriously. Number 1. Arcadia, Los Angeles County. And here we are, finally arriving at the town that might just have the single most famous strange law found anywhere in this entire state, maybe even across the whole country. In Arcadia, peacocks aren't simply wildlife wandering aimlessly around town. They're technically considered official town citizens in every meaningful sense. And because of that unique status, these birds have complete, unquestioned right-of-way absolutely anywhere within city limits, including private driveways and busy public roads alike. If a peacock decides it wants to casually stroll directly through a busy intersection right in the middle of afternoon rush hour, drivers are legally expected to stop completely and patiently wait until the bird is good and ready to move along on its own schedule. The story behind this particular law actually traces all the way back to the late 1800s, when a local resident originally imported several breeding pairs of peacocks into the area, and somehow, over time, the entire town fell completely in love with them. These birds eventually became such a beloved, deeply embedded part of Arcadia's overall identity, that they ended up featured directly on the city's official emblem, cementing their special place in local history for generations of residents still to come. But here's the twist that most people outside of Arcadia genuinely don't know about. While peacocks technically have full right-of-way and are legally protected from harm, actually feeding them is illegal and can come with a fine reaching all the way up to a full $1,000. So essentially, you're legally required to respect these birds completely, patiently let them wander absolutely wherever they please, watch them casually block traffic without any real complaint, but you're strictly forbidden from offering them so much as a single friendly snack along the way. It's such a specific, almost contradictory little set of rules that it perfectly captures just how much personality this particular law genuinely carries. Arcadia's peacock law has become so widely known at this point that it's basically worked its way into broader pop culture, regularly showing up in articles, videos, and casual conversations about weird laws all across the entire country. And once you actually understand the full history behind it, imported birds slowly turning into beloved local icons, eventually earning something close to genuine legal citizenship of their own, it stops feeling like just some random quirky rule, and instead starts feeling like this genuinely charming piece of small-town history that somehow managed to survive well over a full century. And that officially wraps up our list of 10 California towns, with laws strange enough to make you stop and do a genuine double take. What I love most about digging into stuff like this is how each individual law manages to tell its own tiny little story, whether it's about protecting fragile, seasonal butterflies, keeping peacocks safe as something close to honorary town citizens, or simply some random frustrated neighbor centuries ago finally getting fed up with way too much early morning whistling outside their window. These aren't just weird rules that exist purely for the sake of being weird. They're honestly these tiny little windows into exactly what each individual town happened to care about, worry about, or maybe just found themselves unexpectedly dealing with at some specific moment, scattered throughout their own local history. If this video managed to give you something genuinely fun to bring up at your next dinner or weekend barbecue, then putting this whole thing together was absolutely worth it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't end up missing the next deep dive exactly like this one, because trust me, there are still plenty more strange, surprising little stories like these, scattered all across the country, just quietly waiting to be uncovered by someone curious enough to go looking. And if you already happen to know about one of these laws before watching, or if your own town happens to have some strange local law of its own that genuinely deserves a little attention, go ahead and drop it in the comments below, because I would honestly love to hear all about it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will absolutely see you in the next one.